Storytime about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him and my brothers. So a little background information, I was 13 years old and in 7th grade, and I had two older brothers, Josh and Alex, who were twins, and they were both 4 years older than me. Whenever I was 3, my dad left my mom for his dentist, and we never saw him again because he decided to start a whole new family with them. Now, because of that, my older brothers always felt like they had a specific role in my family, especially because the guys that my mom brought home, they would only last a week. Well, finally, my mom met this guy who's really nice, and she decided that she was going to get married to him, but he despised my older brothers. Mainly because before he moved in with us, my mom would not depend on him for anything. Anything that needed taken care of around the house, my brothers would do it. And we didn't have too much money while this guy was loaded. Like the one time my mom and this guy, who we're gonna call Jerry, got into a fight. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him or my brothers. So like I said, my mom and Jerry got into this one fight, and it's a super long story, but pretty much all it made Jerry realize was that he did not have authority over my mother, and she didn't have to depend on him for anything because my brothers would always be there for her. Now, Alex was more of the shy one. Meanwhile, Josh was super hot-headed and didn't deal with anybody's bullshit. And fast forward, my mom and Jerry move in together. That's when we realized that Jerry was super abusive. And Jerry knew that he could pick on Alex whenever he wanted because he wasn't going to do shit. And most of the time, Josh wasn't home because he literally hated Jerry. The one time Alex came home and he did really bad on this one test. And Jerry was like, oh, he needs to learn discipline, blah, blah, blah. The next day, we all were sitting down for breakfast and we saw Alex come downstairs with a black eye. And that's whenever Josh flipped the fuck out. He grabbed Jerry, ripped him across the fucking table, and threatened him with a kitchen knife. And my mom called the cops, like for part 3. Part 3 about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him or my brothers. So like I said he needed to teach some discipline, so he literally beat the shit out of Alex. And we all didn't know until he came downstairs the one morning for breakfast. And that's whenever Josh flipped the hell out. He threatened Jerry with a knife. After that, my mom called the cops. I didn't really do anything but try to de-escalate the situation. But after that, Jerry called a family meeting down to the kitchen table. And he was like, I will not deal with this level of disrespect in this house. He was like, you need to choose between me or them. She was like, well, I'm not going to choose between you or my kids. And he was like, well, then you need to choose them leaving the house. They're about to be 18. They can leave and get their own place. So my mom ended up choosing Jerry because Jerry had a lot of money. And my brothers weren't really that mad about it because it got them out of the house. And my mom would send them a lot of money every month. And Jerry never knew about it. But now instead of him being abusive towards my brothers, he's way more abusive towards my mom.
Something people are always shocked to find out about me is that I worked at a strip club back in 2010. Now, let me clarify, I was a cocktail waitress, not a stripper, but there's nothing wrong if I was. I needed the money, so. And everyone was really nice. And not just nice, but caring. I'm gonna try a new brow product and I'm scared because I always use the same one, Mecca Max Brow Gel. Now, I had a very, very bad experience when I was there. I got essayed by a man. Before some people start commenting like you were asking for it, you were working at a strip club. No, that's not okay. You cannot touch someone when they don't want you to, and if they tell you to stop, you need to stop. Somebody comments that, I will literally, the night that it happened, one of the other waitresses came up to me and said, hey, I'm too busy to take on my regular client. He requested you to take care of him for the night. And she said, he's gonna tip you $1,000, just be nice to him. And I said, okay, sure. Not realizing that this girl was actually this man's girlfriend. Apparently this guy had a bunch of girlfriends, and I guess he was hoping that he would add me to that list. He was really, really nice. He was talking to me about restaurants, taco stands, and really random things. But the thing is, I also had other tables, so I had to keep moving. So when he saw that I kept leaving him to go and tend to my other table, pulled me by my arm, sat me down next to him and said, $500, this is for you to stay with me for the rest of the night. Just, you know, don't worry about anybody else. I'm gonna take care of you. I naively thought that he was just being considerate, trying to let me know, don't worry about your other tables, I'll take care of you. So I went over to the bartender and I let her know that I was gonna be pretty much in one section taking care of this one person. The bartender says, be careful. And I look at her and I'm like, what do you mean? Why? Like, he's super nice. You know, looking back now, I'm like, why wouldn't you just tell me? How beautiful is this? He started asking me about my personal life, and when they started doing that at the strip club, it's because they want to know if you're single or not. He tells his friend that he's with, who I didn't even realize was a bodyguard. So I go from standing to sitting in between these two men. He got handsy and tried to kiss me, or I mean, he did succeed at kissing me, and my instant reaction was to start pushing away. And I probably pushed for about 10 seconds, and then he finally let go. I was stunned. Truly, truly stunned. Stunned. And he was stunned that I was stunned and that I pushed away. The look on his face was just of, what do you mean you're pushing me away? How dare you? Oh, not to mention his bodyguard was looking at me like I had just harassed this man for putting my hands on him to tell him not to touch me. I immediately walk over to my favorite security guard and I tell him exactly what happened. And he looks at me and he's like, "Are you okay? I'm so sorry." Exactly how I expect anybody to react in that situation. He did exactly what I thought he would do. He walks over to this guy. So he just looks at me with this look on his face of like, I have no idea what's happening. I need to find out. And the manager explains to him that this guy is very powerful and that we can't kick him out. Therefore, just let him be. I walk over to the manager and he's like, "Look, I'm so sorry about what happened to you, but we can't tell this guy to go." It was extremely traumatic. It was extremely traumatic. I went home and I cried. I cried for a week straight. This happening at the time it did helped me realize that the person that I was with at the time was probably not the person that I should be with, because when I told them I'm definitely gonna quit, they said, you know, you just need to get over this. And that confirmed to me that I needed to get out of that relationship, which I did. The waitress who originally told me, "He's great, he's gonna tip you really well, be nice, just be nice." Apparently, she knew that he was gonna do that because that's something he did with her all the time. Like I said, she was his girlfriend. I didn't know this. I didn't know this information at all. You know, I don't want to say that she set me up or anything because maybe she thought that I knew. She kind of apologized, but not really. I feel terrible that a lot of women go through things like this and it's not exclusive to a strip club. It can happen to you in your workplace or at home or with friends or at a party or at school, or at places where you should totally feel safe, and it's horrible. I need to get to bed because I did all of this just to talk to you guys. All right, bye.
Story time about how my best friend and boyfriend slept with each other. So a little background information, I was 16 and in 10th grade. So this whole thing started 2 years ago whenever my crush asked me on a date, and then blah, 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 we became official. And I decided to introduce him to my best friend, Vivian. And we're gonna call my boyfriend Louise. So one day we're all in my room watching a movie and I went to go and grab some snacks, but I left the door open because I wanted to see what was happening in the movie. And while I'm in the kitchen, I see Louise staring at Vivian. Like, I was low-key weirded out because why are you doing that? Anyway, so then I went into the room and I felt this weird tension between them. So I stopped inviting my best friend to come over whenever we would hang out. And she got super mad at me for this. And Vivian and I would always pull pranks on each other. So the one day I call up her boyfriend John and I'm like, "Oh, we should say that we like each other." So we did, and she didn't care. Which maybe she just didn't think the prank was funny, but it was sus. So the next day I stop over at Vivian's house and she doesn't answer. For part 2. Part 2 about how I caught my boyfriend and my best friend sleeping together. So like I said, I kind of felt bad for this prank, so I went over to her house the next day and I knock on the door and she doesn't answer. So I go around to the back door of her house and nobody was answering, so I look through the window because the cars were there. And that's whenever I see her and my boyfriend doing it. Yup. So obviously I was pissed off and I happened to have my boyfriend's house key, so I went to the Dollar Tree and bought 50 different nail polishes. And as you could probably guess, I went to his house and put nail polish all over his shit. His clothes, his shoes, everything. Even his walls. When I left, I asked John if we could meet and talk, and Wednesday we decided to confront them. And Louise and Vivian said that they had been dating, secretly, behind our backs. Way before me and Louise even started dating. There really is no moral to this story, to be honest. It's just that girls need to start following girl code more and not being fake.
Story time about how my mom found out my dad had a whole other family, and then he abandoned her with 5 kids. Yes, this is my mama's story time. I'm gonna try not to cry. My mama and specimen donor met when they were super young. They got married when she was 21 and she got pregnant at 22. And then they had 4 more children. My brother and I are twins and we're the babies of the family. Now, when my brother and I were a year old, my mom started noticing some wacky stuff. Specimen donor was out all hours of the night because he had business here and there. And by the way, my mom is raising 5 children, including 2 newborn twins. Thankfully, she had the help of my sister. At the time, she was already 15, so there's a huge age gap between her and I. Oh my god, I'm already losing it. Shout out to my amazing sister because she helped raise me and my siblings. In fact, when I wanted to go out to a party or something, my mom would tell me to go ask my sister for permission because she always said no to everything. So one day my mom confronts specimen donor. This is when he confesses that he had gotten someone else pregnant. Not only was she pregnant, she'd already had another kid of his, and that he was going to go live with his new family. My mama kicked him right out. She enrolled herself in night school and became a lawyer. She took over my grandpa's dying law office, and she is now one of the most recognized lawyers in all of Central America. Thank you, Kosas, for working with me on this video. I seriously love you guys. And to all the mamas out there working hard, you are seen and you are loved. Bye.
Story time about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 9th grade. Well, at the end of summer, right before school started, this girl named Liv added me on Snapchat. And I had seen her all around school. She was very popular and a little bit stuck up. But I added her back and then I got a call on Snapchat from her. I answer very awkwardly and I'm like, hi. And then she was like, oh, I've seen you in a lot of this guy's pictures. Are you guys like best friends? And I'm like, yeah, sort of. And she goes, have you ever thought about dating him? It was just an extremely weird out of nowhere conversation. Anyway, so fast forward 2 weeks, I walk in the first day of school with my best friend Tommy. And Tommy and I have like every single class together. For some reason, Liv thought that we were friends and she would come and go as she pleased. Like Tommy and I would be standing at my locker. She would come over. Anyways, fast forward to chemistry. She walks in the class, winks at Tommy, like for part 3 about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So like I said, she asked me if I wanted to hang out with Tommy and a few other guys. I told her that I was going out of town. When I got back from out of town, the next day, I get a text from Tommy. He was flipping out on me. He said that I was talking shit about him to Liv. And apparently I said that I was happy that his mother died. And a bunch of other bullshit. Well, after that, Tommy cut me off, so I was lonely, and I started hanging out with Liv more, even though she said that terrible stuff to Tommy and made him cut me off. So fast forward a year, he is a new best friend, right? I get a DM from her on Instagram saying like, hey, did Tommy used to be your best friend? Pretty much everybody knew what happened between me and Tommy, but she was like, that girl that you're best friends with is dating him now. And then he completely cut me off. So technically, she used both her and I to get with Tommy. But after dating for literally like 2 months, he cheated on her because she slept with 5 other guys.
My husband forced me to watch him doing it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. I'm an overweight 28-year-old. My husband hates the fact that I'm fat. He and I dated for 2 years before he asked me to marry him. At this time, everything was pretty much okay. We had a lot of fun together. We were basically best friends. But after we got married, I ended up gaining some weight. Mostly because I wasn't really taking care of myself and because I've never cared about gaining weight or not. But to my husband, this is horrible. After I gained 20 pounds, he started saying things like, you're starting to look different and I don't like it. I can see your belly when we're having sex. And I gained another 20 pounds. And this is when he was really grossed out. If I asked him for a towel while I was showering, he would just throw it at me. Because apparently the sight of my naked body disgusted him. After a few weeks, I asked him to stop talking to me that way and he said that he wouldn't because he didn't marry a fat woman. But I think he should love me no matter what. Even if I'm fat or skinny, he should still love me. He got to the point where he wouldn't even touch me or kiss me good morning or good night. And we used to have a pretty active sex life. Things got way worse. He started not coming home. Part 2 is up. My husband was so disgusted by my body that he couldn't stand the sight of me naked. This is when he stopped coming home some nights. The next day that he would finally arrive, he was always drunk and extra mean. I would ask him where he went and he would say I was at the bar with my friends. And by friends, he meant his coworkers. And by coworkers, he meant his work wife. At this point, I had to take my makeup off, you guys, because it was way too cakey. Even my brother said it looked bad. I knew about my husband's work wife because at every work event, she was always there and she was always trying to be so nice to me. He would say things to me like, oh, he better be treating you right. You're so beautiful. But the whole time I know my husband's more attracted to her than me. This woman was really fit too. She loved the gym and my husband and her had that in common. This is when I started becoming more and more jealous. Every time he stayed out with his friends, I would ask him where he went. Finally, he confessed one night that he had been hooking up with his coworker and that it served me right. He told me my body was so grotesque that he gagged every time he saw me naked. Yeah, my own husband is telling me that. But instead of reacting like a normal person and leaving him, I decided to get even fatter. He ended up gaining another 15 pounds. And this pissed him off even more. It made me happy to piss him off. Part 3 is up. My husband forced me to watch him do it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. This is when I gained another 10 pounds just to piss him off. In retaliation, he started kicking me out of our bedroom at night. If I would get into bed, he would literally kick me off the bed. That's when he told me that I needed to go downstairs and work out, or at the very least, stop eating. At this point, I knew that he had been having an affair with his work wife. So I decided to ask him directly. He had no shame in telling me that he was having an affair with her. That's when he started saying things like, her body is way better than yours. He even said said that he was more than happy to bring her over so that I could meet her. And that's what he did the very next day. He brought her to our house. I expected her to be on my side and tell him absolutely no. Instead, she started calling me names as soon as she came into our house. She started referring to me as the fatty. Suddenly, they started getting naked. And I just watched. Part of me couldn't believe it. I was frozen in time. While they were getting it on the couch, I was sitting there crying. The whole time my husband is calling me a pig. When they were done, they left. 2 days later, he asked me for a divorce. But I don't want to give it to him. He'll have to die married to me. What should I do?
Story time on when I caught my stepdad abusing my mom. So a little background information, men are trash, and I was 13 and in 7th grade. Well, it was my birthday and my mom took me to the shoe store to get some new shoes. And I saw this guy keep staring at my mother. So I pulled my mom aside and whispered to her, like, hey, there's some dude staring at us. Because low-key, he looked creepy as hell. Well, apparently he wasn't creepy. He came up to my mom and started talking to her. And he was flirting with my mom a lot, so I grabbed a random pair of shoes and told her I was ready to go. Her and I walk up to the register. I think the conversation is over with her and James. But then he's like, oh, like, let me pay for that. Next thing you know, they exchange numbers and I start seeing him a lot more. And my mom seemed very happy, like she was smiling 24/7. So fast forward, we all move in together and I got a job. Well, my best friend Kayla was 17 and she had her driver's license. Like for part 2.
Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, do you want to leave now? And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3.
Okay, part 3. So like I said, I walked in and she knew that something was wrong with me right away. Because she was like, oh, I have a letter from your boyfriend. And usually I would run up, grab it, read it really quickly. Because I would only get like 1 letter a week. But instead I ran downstairs because her face was fucking melting. So 5 minutes later, she has to come downstairs and help me get dressed into my pajamas because I forgot how to dress myself. I didn't want to be left alone that night, so my friend stayed in the basement with me. So he went and tried to go to sleep. But he couldn't because I was watching Butterfly Effect for 8 hours straight. Like, that was the only thing that could calm me down. But I still don't even know all the freaking words to it, which is weird. Like, he would try to change the video and somehow I end up back to Butterfly Effect. And then he tried to kiss me. So he left the next morning because he had to go to work, which was at like 11 a.m. And I took this tab at 8 p.m. the day before. So I was getting texts like, where are you? You're supposed to be home now. So I had to go home and act normal in front of everybody while I'm still tripping balls. And I also got grounded for coming home late because I could not come home at the right time because I was tripping so hard. And this lasted for about 24 hours.
Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, wow, you're growing into your body, or wow, you got great hips. He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, ew. He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, oh, you know how he is. So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things things like if I was a virgin or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dressed so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. It's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sent me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting. And that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13 and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's not on Instagram. My mom and dad had me when they were really young. My mom was 17 and my dad was 19. For some reason, my mom doesn't like talking about him, so I never really found out exactly how they broke up. All I know is that they stayed together until I was 5 years old. Something really bad happened and then my mom kicked him out of the house. Like I said, I don't even know what happened. When I was 12 years old, he begged my mom to come back, and she let him live in the apartment we had. But he's pretty much a deadbeat. He didn't help my mom pay for the bills. He didn't even want to get a job. He even went as far as begging my mom to become a stripper. He said that she would make way more money than the job she had. She was a secretary at the time. When I was 15, he left our house again. I never got a bad feeling from him when he was living with us though. With a lot of hard work, my mom was able to put me through college. I graduated and I got a really good job. I bought my mom and me a house and we moved in together. Then COVID happened and I lost my job. A friend suggested I start OnlyFans and I decided to do it. I started making a lot more money than I ever thought I would. Some months I was making around $20,000. This one guy would send me $1,000 every single week. In exchange for pictures. Part 2 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's on my Instagram. So this one guy started sending me $1,000 every single week. In exchange, I would send him private photos. Everything was totally fine until he started asking me questions. He would ask me things like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite dessert? Because it's OnlyFans, I never really answered honestly. But then one day he told me, you love The Little Mermaid, don't you? And I was like, what? Because The Little Mermaid was my favorite movie as a kid. Watched it at least 3 times a week when I was a kid. First I thought it was a cousin playing a joke on me, so I decided to block them. The next day, I get another message. This one says, I remember how you used to love hot dogs. That's when I really shit myself. Because my dad and I would make hot dogs every single Friday. It was our thing together. Like I said, he was a deadbeat, so he couldn't afford anything more than cheap hot dogs. And that's when he said, I have a confession. And before I could reply, he said, I'm your dad. I felt so disgusted. I blocked him and then blocked him from my cell phone too. That's when he sends me a long text message explaining why he signed up to my OnlyFans. He said that he was just trying to get to know me, that all he really wanted was to get me back as his daughter. Then why ask for nudes? Part 3 is up.
Part 2 about when I caught my stepdad abusing my mother. So like I said, we all moved in together. My mother was super happy and I had a job. My best friend would come and pick me up after this job and I would usually get off work around 7 p.m. Well, around this time, James would have already been at work. He usually started work at like 6 o'clock, but every time that I would come home, my mother would be crying in her bedroom. So I ended up telling my best friend about it, and she said that she would come and get me early the next day from work, so that way we could possibly see what was happening while I wasn't there. So fast forward the next day, Kayla comes and gets me early from work. She pulls around the corner and we walk to my house because they would have seen her car if we parked on the street. I quietly unlock the door. My best friend and I go upstairs. We hear my mom screaming in pain, and the bedroom door was wide open. He was hitting my mother. So I kind of whispered to my best friend to take a video while I called the cops. He ended up going to jail, got a restraining order, and now my mom and I are living in a new house.
My father-in-law is forcing my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time, and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup today. My husband and I have been married for 2 years. Now, we did get married very, very young. By very young, I mean I was 18 and he was 19. When we started dating in high school, his dad was totally against the relationship. See, my husband was super popular. He played on the football team. All the girls chased him. He also played basketball and was perfect at everything he did. As you can imagine, was extremely strict with him. He was not even allowed to go out on weekends. Me, on the other hand, my parents are pretty much hippies. They let me do whatever I want. We're all very spiritual. My parents have full trust in me. Because of this, I make smart decisions. I actively seek my parents' advice. I even told my parents I lost my virginity when I did. And we had a big conversation about it. It was not dramatic. It was not like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They just support me in everything I do. Now, my husband's parents are not the same. They tell him not to do a lot of things. They try to control him. So as we were dating in high school, his dad kept telling him to break up with me. He claimed that I was holding him back and that because of me, he spent less time training. Which technically, yes, is true. But at the same time, you cannot stop your son from experiencing human relationships. In fact, he actually broke up with me for 2 weeks. But then we got back together in secret. Everything culminated when he asked me to marry him right after graduation. His parents were absolutely against it. But my parents were all for it. You guessed it, go to part 2. My father-in-law wants my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time, and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. When he asked me to marry him right out of high school, his parents absolutely freaked. They went to my parents' house and told me off for saying yes. In other words, they were completely blaming me for the whole thing, as if their own son didn't go buy a ring and ask me to marry him. Even did a beautiful proposal, which he had been planning for months. But at this point, his parents didn't even know that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. When they came to my house, his mom, my now mother-in-law, started crying and yelling at me. She told me that I was ruining their family, that I was trying to steal her son, and that all I really cared about was their money. By the way, my parents were middle class, but we were not destitute. His parents are very rich. They own several businesses. But of course, I'm not after their money. That's when they said that if we did end up getting married, I would have to sign a prenup. And I said, yeah, I want to marry him because I'm in love. At this point, his parents knew they couldn't stop us. We were going to get married with or without their approval. But thankfully, his parents came around and let us get married. We had a quaint, small wedding. It was so magical. But his parents wanted him to go to college to play football. In other words, they wanted him to be the next Tom Brady. They made him train for hours, and they didn't even let us live together for the first year we were married. And because they were supporting him, he couldn't say no. They had us on a schedule. Could only see him for about 2 to 3 hours a day. And we were married. 2 years later, he's playing for a football team. But his parents keep thinking that I'm dragging him down. So now they're trying to convince him to leave me. Go to part 3. My father-in-law is trying to convince my husband to divorce me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and this is the final part of the 3-part story time. I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. After a year of us being married, his parents did not allow us to live together because he needed to focus on football. So obviously, I was living with my parents. I was focusing on my own studies, but his parents did allow us to see each other 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, you might think my husband is a total pushover, but let me explain something. His parents paid for all of his training and his entire college tuition. They gave him the best of everything. He got sports massages every single day. They even installed a cold plunge in their backyard. They also had a full gym setup where he and his teammates would go work out every single day. In their house. Obviously, he did not have time for little old me. After a year of this, I couldn't take anymore. I wanted to be with my husband. So I gave him an ultimatum. That he tell his parents that he and I wanted to live together. That's all I wanted. I was even willing to pay for half of the rent. And he told his parents, they said fine. And they bought us a house. Obviously under my husband's name, not mine. Fast forward another year up until now. I've heard his dad tell him on several occasions that he needs to divorce me. That he could find a much prettier wife once he becomes bigger in the NFL. And I walked in on his mom telling him that maybe I can't even have kids. And that he should have me checked. My parents-in-law hate me. I sometimes feel like I am holding him back. They make us miserable. My parents think I should just walk away from the marriage, but I'm too in love. Should I confront my parents-in-law? Help me think of what I should say to them.
Story time. Is blood really thicker than water? Metaphorically speaking, of course. So a little background information. I was 16 years old and I was in 10th grade. And I had just started dating this guy that my friends introduced me to. He was extremely attractive, really smart, and really kind. Literally had all the traits a girl could want in a boyfriend. So him and I are talking for a while, and then we start dating, and we were amazing together. And my sister had just came back home from teaching in Thailand. Surprisingly, her and I got super close because we always used to fight with each other. And now we were inseparable. The only issue was she was 25 years old acting like a child. She always wanted to be at my boyfriend's house with him and his family. Weird, I know. Anyway, so she was always over there with them, and I thought that maybe she was just lonely. And wrong, of course. Now, of course, like any other relationship, mine wasn't perfect, but my boyfriend and I started having more problems than usual when my sister showed up. He was being super weird and all the signs pointed to him cheating on me. Like for part 2. Part 2, is blood thicker than water? Metaphorically speaking, of course. So like I said, my sister started spending more time at my boyfriend's house. I thought that she was lonely, but then my boyfriend started acting weird and all the signs pointed to him cheating on me. But I ignored it because I thought that him and I were in love like in the movies. And also, if I broke up with him, it would be like breaking up with his family because I love them like my own. Fast forward, his sister ends up getting married and my sister and I were invited to the wedding. Fast forward, everybody gets drunk. We end up spending the night at his cousin's house and something was off with my boyfriend. He wasn't really talking to me. He wouldn't touch me. He pretty much acted like he was done with me. Well, then there's my sister who was flirting and touching him like it was normal. Fast forward a month, I asked my sister if anything happened between them and she goes, I think we slept together. So I confronted him about it and he just laughs and he's like, it wasn't that serious. So I end up breaking up with him and then I start finding unhealthy ways to cope, aka drinking. And eventually I got so lonely to the point where I forgave my sister. And then I started seeing this other guy and he was amazing, like for part 3.
I caught my boyfriend trying to hire an escort. What should I do? Disclaimers are not my story time. My boyfriend and I have been together 2 years. We met on Bumble and we've been inseparable ever since. I will admit that at the beginning of the relationship, he sort of manipulated me. Made me think that he did want a serious relationship, but he wouldn't commit. It's totally different now when he even begged for me to move in with him 2 months ago. Now he's very wealthy. Not only is his family extremely rich, but he actually started his own businesses and is independently wealthy. I'm also independently wealthy as I own 2 businesses. He's paying for all the bills, but I did offer to help him and he said no. I still often pay for groceries and sometimes I pay for dinner when we go out together. Here's the thing. We've trusted each other throughout our relationship because we're both confident people. I've never had a problem with him cheating. I've never cheated on him. Because of this, my boyfriend leaves his phone around me all the time. I said I moved in with him and things were great. We were about to watch a movie and he asked me to order Postmates on his phone. I get on his phone and I see an app I don't recognize. Out of curiosity, I click on it. I knew right away it was an escort account. I see a bunch of profiles of very beautiful women and one unread message. I open it and it says, I'll see you tomorrow night at 6. Thanks for the $4,000. Part 2 is up.